the Royal Guard. The crimson banners of Earth fluttered against the alien skyline of Nexus Prime, the galactic capital where 1,000 species mingled in an uneasy peace. Prince George Windsor stood at the viewing platform of the human embassy, his military dress uniform crisp despite the humid alien air. At 28, he had volunteered for this diplomatic mission not out of duty to the crown, but from a burning curiosity about humanity's place among the stars. The Terran delegation had arrived 3 days ago for the Centennial Peace Accords, a ceremony meant to celebrate 100 years since the first contact protocols were established. Earth was still considered a minor player in galactic politics, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 30 years prior. Most alien species regarded humans with polite indifference, seeing them as newcomers who had yet to prove their worth in the cosmic community. George adjusted his ceremonial sword, a relic from Earth that drew curious glances from passing alien dignitaries. The weapon was purely symbolic now, as energy shields and plasma weapons dominated modern warfare. Yet something about its simple steel construction seemed to fascinate the various species they encountered. "Your Highness, the ceremony begins in 1 hour," announced Captain Sarah Mitchell, his security detail commander. She was a veteran of the Martian colonial wars, chosen specifically for this mission due to her experience with hostile environments and crowd control. The prince nodded, watching as thousands of beings gathered in the vast ceremonial plaza below. The Zephyrian delegates, with their crystalline exoskeletons, took their positions near the central stage. The gas-form ethereals drifted in their containment suits, while the massive Krontor representatives stood like living mountains among the crowd. Each species had their own traditions, their own ways of showing respect or dominance. What caught George's attention was the growing tension in the crowd. Small groups of various species were clustering together, their body language suggesting agitation. Captain Mitchell noticed it too, her hand instinctively moving toward her sidearm. "Something's wrong down there," she observed, activating her communication device. "This is Mitchell to Embassy Security. We have potential crowd disturbance indicators in Sector 7. The response crackled through the comm unit. "Acknowledged, Captain. Local security reports increasing tension due to disputed territorial claims raised yesterday. Some delegates are calling for human expulsion from the Accords." George felt his jaw tighten. The territorial disputes involved 3 star systems that Earth had inadvertently settled during early exploration missions. The planets were technically unclaimed, but several alien species now argued that humanity's expansion was too aggressive for such a young spacefaring civilization. "They want us gone," George said quietly, more to himself than to Captain Mitchell. "Yes, sir. The hegemony faction believes humans are expanding too quickly without proper understanding of galactic law. They see our presence here as presumptuous." Below them, the crowd was becoming increasingly restless. Raised voices in a dozen alien languages created a cacophony that the translation devices struggled to process. The Zephyrians were flashing their anger through rapid color changes across their crystal bodies, while several Krontor were stamping their massive feet in what George recognized as a threat display. The human delegation was small, consisting of only 12 individuals, including Prince George. Ambassador Chen Wei was the lead diplomat, a seasoned negotiator who had helped draft the Mars Accords. But even her considerable skills seemed insufficient for the growing hostility they faced. "Your Highness, I recommend we withdraw to the embassy until this situation stabilizes," Captain Mitchell suggested, her professional instincts taking over. George shook his head. "If we retreat now, we confirm everything they believe about us. That we're not ready for this responsibility." As if summoned by his words, Ambassador Chen appeared on the platform, her face grave. "Prince George, we have a problem. The hegemony faction is demanding an immediate vote to suspend Earth's membership in the Galactic Council. They're claiming we violated the expansion protocols." "Did we?" George asked directly. Chen hesitated. Technically, no, but the protocols are deliberately vague, and we may have been more aggressive than other species typically are in their first century of space travel. The noise from the plaza was growing louder. Security forces from various species were forming cordons, but their loyalties were divided. Some clearly supported the anti-human sentiment, while others maintained professional neutrality. George studied the crowd through his field glasses, noting the positioning of different groups. The humans below looked isolated and increasingly nervous. Several alien species were actively avoiding them, creating empty spaces that made the human delegation appear even smaller and more vulnerable. "What happens if they vote us out?" he asked. "We lose access to galactic trade routes, diplomatic protection, and most importantly, the technological exchange programs that have accelerated our development," Chen explained. "We'd be effectively quarantined to our own solar system until we prove ourselves worthy." The prince felt the weight of history pressing down on him. This wasn't just about diplomatic protocols or territorial claims. This was about humanity's future among the stars, their right to be considered equals in the galactic community. "There's something else," Captain Mitchell interjected, listening to her comm unit. "Intelligence reports suggest this isn't entirely spontaneous. The hegemony faction has been planning this confrontation for months. They're using the territorial dispute as a pretext to challenge human membership while we're still too new to have strong allies." George processed this information, his mind racing through the implications. This was a calculated political maneuver designed to catch Earth at its most vulnerable moment. The other species had centuries or millennia to build alliances and establish their positions. Humanity had barely 3 decades. "Show me the crowd composition," he ordered. Mitchell activated a holographic display showing the plaza from above, with different species marked in various colors. The anti-human coalition was larger than George had initially realized, representing nearly 40% of the Galactic Council membership. The neutral parties made up another 40%, leaving only 20% as potential human allies. "Those numbers don't look good for a vote," Ambassador Chen observed grimly. "Then we don't let it come to a vote," George said firmly. "At least not today." Both women looked at him with surprise. "Sir, I'm not sure what you mean," Mitchell said carefully. George pointed toward the plaza, where the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Several minor scuffles had broken out between different factions, and the security forces were struggling to maintain order. "Look at what's happening down there. This isn't diplomacy anymore, it's mob mentality." As if to emphasize his point, a group of Zephyrians began advancing toward the small human delegation, their crystal bodies flashing aggressive red patterns. The humans instinctively moved closer together, but they were vastly outnumbered and far from any potential escape route. "Captain Mitchell, what's the quickest route to the plaza floor?" George asked, already moving toward the exit. "Sir, you can't be serious. My orders are to keep you safe, and going down there would be..." "Would be what? Courageous? Isn't that supposed to be a human trait worth preserving?" The captain blocked his path, her face resolute. "With all due respect, Your Highness, it would be suicide. There are thousands of potentially hostile aliens down there, and only one of you." George smiled, and for a moment, Captain Mitchell saw something in his expression that reminded her why the British royal family had survived for over 1,000 years through wars, revolutions, and now first contact with alien civilizations. "Captain, have you ever heard of the Thin Red Line?" She nodded slowly. "The Battle of Balaclava, 1854. British infantry stood against Russian cavalry. Outnumbered, outgunned, but they held the line because someone had to. Because retreat would have meant the loss of everything they were fighting to protect." George straightened his uniform and checked his ceremonial sword one final time. "Today our line is down there, and our people need to see that their prince won't abandon them." Ambassador Chen stepped forward. "George, this isn't a battlefield. This is diplomacy. There are other ways to handle this situation. Are there? He challenged. Look down there, Ambassador. Diplomacy ended the moment that Crowd decided to turn this into a test of human courage. They want to see if we'll run when faced with overwhelming odds. They want to confirm that we're just another species of cowards who hide behind technology and treaties. The sound of shattering crystal echoed from the plaza as the first real violence erupted. A Zephyrian had struck one of the human guards, and the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. That's it, George declared, pushing past Captain Mitchell. I'm going down there. Then I'm going with you, Mitchell said grimly, falling into step beside him. But I want it on record that this is the worst tactical decision I've ever seen a member of the royal family make. Ambassador Chen grabbed her communication device. All human personnel, this is Ambassador Chen. Prince George is moving to the plaza floor. I repeat, the prince is entering the crowd. All security teams converge on his position. As they descended through the embassy building, George could hear the growing chaos outside. Alien voices raised in anger, the sound of security barriers being pushed, and underneath it all, the distinctive sound of human voices trying to maintain calm in an impossible situation. Sir, Captain Mitchell said as they reached the ground floor, once we step outside, there's no guarantee we can get back to safety. Are you absolutely certain about this? George paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Through the reinforced glass, he could see the mob pressing closer to the human delegation. His people were backing toward the embassy building, but they were still hundreds of meters away from safety. Captain, do you know why they call these accords the Centennial Peace? Because it's been 100 years since the major powers agreed to resolve disputes through negotiation rather than warfare. Exactly. But peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of courage to face conflict without resorting to violence. Today, we show them what human courage looks like. With that, Prince George pushed open the door and stepped into the alien crowd that was baying for human blood. The stand. The moment Prince George stepped into the plaza, the chaos seemed to focus on him like a lens concentrating sunlight. The nearest group of Zephyrians immediately noticed his approach, their crystalline bodies shifting from angry red to a confused orange as they processed the sight of a single human walking directly toward the center of the conflict. Captain Mitchell stayed close behind him, her hand resting on her sidearm but not drawing it. She had activated her emergency beacon, which would alert every human security officer in the area, but help was still minutes away. For now, it was just the two of them against several hundred increasingly agitated aliens. The crowd parted uncertainly as George approached. His ceremonial uniform marked him clearly as someone of importance. And the sight of a high-ranking human walking calmly into what was essentially a lynch mob gave many of the aliens pause. The Krontor, massive beings that stood nearly 3 meters tall, stopped their threatening foot-stomping to watch this unexpected development. George could see the human delegation about 50 meters ahead, pressed against a temporary barrier with nowhere to retreat. Ambassador Chen and her staff were maintaining diplomatic composure, but their security detail was clearly preparing for the worst. The aliens surrounding them weren't quite ready to commit to violence, but the tension was escalating with every passing moment. Your Highness, called out Dr. James Harrison, the delegation's chief scientist, when he spotted George approaching. You shouldn't be here. A hegemony representative, a tall, insectoid creature with 4 arms and compound eyes, stepped into George's path. The being's translation device rendered its clicking speech into mechanical English. Human prince offspring, this gathering is not for your kind. Withdraw to your dwelling structure before consequences manifest. George stopped directly in front of the alien, noting that he had to look up to meet its compound eyes. The creature's 4 arms were positioned in what his briefings had identified as an aggressive posture, and several other hegemony species were moving to flank him. I am Prince George of the House of Windsor, Representative of Earth and protector of human interests, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the immediate area. These are my people, and I will not withdraw while they face threat. The insectoid's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound the translation device interpreted as laughter. Protector? You are one small human among hundreds of superior beings. Your protection is meaningless. Captain Mitchell tensed, ready to draw her weapon, but George raised his hand slightly to signal her to wait. He had noticed something important. The crowd was listening. Conversations in dozens of alien languages were dying down as more beings focused on this unexpected confrontation. You misunderstand the nature of protection, George replied calmly. It's not about superior numbers or strength. It's about the willingness to stand between those you serve and those who would harm them. A new voice interrupted their exchange. The human speaks of concepts he does not understand. The speaker was a Kirith, a species known for their philosophical traditions and their influence in galactic politics. The being resembled a massive tree with flowing bark-like skin and branches that served as arms. Young species often confuse bravery with foolishness. George turned to face the Kirith, recognizing an opportunity. These beings were respected as mediators and deep thinkers. If he could engage them philosophically rather than confrontationally, he might be able to shift the entire dynamic of the situation. Elder Kirith, perhaps you could help me understand something, George said respectfully. In your long history, have you ever encountered a species that achieved greatness through cowardice? The tree-like being's branches rustled, a sign of interest. Elaborate on your meaning, human prince. George gestured toward the crowd around them. Every species here achieved space travel, built civilizations, and earned their place in the galactic community. But I'm guessing none of them did it by running away when things became difficult. Several aliens nearby had stopped their agitation to listen to this exchange. The Kirith's philosophical discussions were legendary, and even angry mobs tended to pay attention when one of them engaged in debate. You equate retreat with cowardice, the Kirith observed. This shows limited understanding. Sometimes withdrawal is wisdom. I agree completely, George said, surprising both the alien and Captain Mitchell. When retreat serves a greater purpose, it demonstrates wisdom. But when retreat abandons those who depend on your protection, it becomes cowardice. The Kirith's branches swayed thoughtfully. And you believe your presence here serves protection rather than provocation? George looked around the crowd, noting that the immediate threat to the human delegation had decreased as aliens focused on the philosophical debate. Elder, my delegation came here to participate in peace accords. They came in good faith, following proper protocols, seeking to contribute to galactic harmony. Now they face hostility, not because of anything they've done, but because others question their right to exist among the stars. A Zephyrian interjected, its crystal body flashing angry red patterns. Humans expand too quickly, take systems without proper consultation, show no respect for established order. And yet, George responded, every system we've settled was unclaimed according to galactic law. We've followed the same colonization protocols that every other species used during their expansion periods. He paused, letting this sink in. Unless you're suggesting that humans should be held to different standards than everyone else. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several aliens exchanged glances, and George could see that some were beginning to reconsider their positions. The Zephyrian's crystal body shifted to orange, indicating uncertainty. The Krontor representative, a massive creature whose voice rumbled like distant thunder, spoke for the first time. Human is small, but words have weight. Krontor, remember, own early expansion. Other species questioned our right to claim territory. How did the Krontor respond to such challenges? George asked respectfully. Krontor proved worth through action, not words. Showed strength when others showed doubt. George nodded, understanding. And today, would you say the Krontor are valued members of the galactic community? Krontor earn respect through centuries of honorable service. Then perhaps you understand why humans ask only for the same opportunity to prove ourselves through service, rather than being judged before we've had that chance. The crowd was definitely shifting now. The aggressive posturing had decreased, and more beings were engaging in quiet discussions rather than angry demonstrations. Captain Mitchell noticed security forces from various species beginning to relax their defensive positions. The insectoid hegemony representative, however, wasn't ready to concede. Pretty words do not change facts. Humans are dangerous, expand without wisdom. Fight wars among themselves even now. Mars colonies still struggle with Earth governments. This hit closer to home, and George felt the sting of truth in the accusation. Humanity was still learning to govern itself across multiple worlds, and internal conflicts were well documented in galactic records. You're absolutely right, George admitted, surprising the alien. We do have internal conflicts. We're still learning to govern multiple worlds effectively. We make mistakes. The hegemony representative's compound eyes focused sharply on him, perhaps expecting a defense rather than admission. But, George continued, I would ask you this. Was your species perfect when they first achieved interstellar flight? Did the hegemony worlds never experience internal conflict or governmental growing pains? The insectoid's mandibles clicked uncertainty. Around the crowd, other aliens were shifting uncomfortably, clearly remembering their own species' turbulent early spacefaring periods. The difference, George pressed on, is that your mistakes were made in isolation, without galactic scrutiny. You had centuries to solve your problems before joining this community. Humans are being asked to solve the same problems while under constant observation and criticism. The Cherith's branches rustled approvingly. The human shows wisdom in acknowledging weakness while requesting patience rather than perfection. A new commotion drew their attention to the edge of the crowd. More humans were arriving, but not security forces. These were civilians from the human delegation quarters, families of diplomatic staff who had come to see what was happening. Among them, George spotted a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, holding her mother's hand and staring wide-eyed at the crowd of alien beings. The sight of human children seemed to impact several alien species profoundly. The Kirith moved closer, its massive form somehow conveying gentleness as it regarded the family. Young ones, it said softly. They know no fear of differences. George seized the moment. Elder Kirith, when you look at that child, do you see a threat to galactic security? Or do you see the future that we're all trying to build together? The tree-like being extended one of its branch arms toward the little girl, who giggled and reached out to touch the bark-like surface. Her mother tensed initially, but didn't pull her away, recognizing the peaceful intent. I see potential, the Cherith said quietly. Potential for growth, for learning, for contributing to the great tapestry of galactic civilization. That's all we ask, George said simply. The chance to realize that potential. The opportunity to prove that humans can contribute something valuable to this community. The hegemony representative made one final attempt to maintain the confrontational atmosphere. And if humans prove unworthy, if they become threat to galactic peace? George's expression grew serious. Then you'll have every right to take action against us. But judge us on our actions, not on your fears about what we might become. The Krontor representative stamped once. A gesture George had learned indicated approval rather than threat. Human prince speaks truth. All species earn place through deeds, not birthright. Around the plaza, the aggressive energy was dissipating. Aliens who had been pushing toward confrontation were now engaged in philosophical discussions or simply watching the interaction between different species. The immediate crisis had passed, but George knew this was just the beginning. Captain Mitchell moved closer to him. "Your Highness, we should probably start moving toward safety. This crowd is calm now, but situations can change quickly." George nodded but didn't move immediately. "In a moment, Captain. First, I want to invite any being who wishes to continue this discussion to join us at the embassy. Real understanding requires more than brief exchanges in crowded plazas." The Chirith accepted immediately. Elder Council would be honored to engage in extended philosophical discourse with human representatives. Several other species also expressed interest, and George realized they had accomplished something more important than avoiding immediate conflict. They had opened genuine dialogue about humanity's place in the galactic community. As they began moving toward the embassy, the little girl who had touched the Chirith's branches broke free from her mother and ran up to George. "Are you really a prince?" she asked in the direct way that only children could manage. "I am," George replied, kneeling to her level. "Did you just save all of us?" George considered the question carefully. "I think we all saved each other today. By talking instead of fighting, by listening instead of just speaking, by remembering that we're all trying to build something better together." The child nodded as if this made perfect sense, then skipped back to her mother. Captain Mitchell shook her head in amazement as they walked. "Sir, I've never seen anything like that. You turned a potential riot into a philosophy seminar." "Not me, Captain. We all did. Humans and aliens together. Today we proved that different species can find common ground when they're willing to look for it." As they reached the embassy, George looked back at the plaza where groups of aliens and humans continued their discussions. The formal ceremony had been postponed, but something more important had taken place. The real work of building galactic understanding had begun. The legacy. 3 months after the incident at Nexus Prime, Prince George stood before the assembled Galactic Council in the great amphitheater that had witnessed 1,000 years of interspecies diplomacy. The chamber's bioluminescent walls pulsed with gentle patterns that helped different species maintain calm during heated debates. Today, however, the atmosphere was anything but heated. The formal vote on humanity's continued membership in the Galactic Council had been postponed twice as news of what had happened in the plaza spread throughout known space. What the media had dubbed the stand at Nexus Prime had become something far larger than anyone had anticipated. The story had resonated across hundreds of worlds and dozens of species, sparking conversations about courage, leadership, and the nature of civilized discourse. Ambassador Chen sat in the human delegation section, still somewhat amazed at how dramatically their situation had changed. The 3-hour philosophical discussion that had taken place in the embassy following the Plaza incident had been broadcast live across the galactic networks. The sight of a young human prince engaging dozens of alien species in thoughtful debate about governance, expansion, and the responsibilities of emerging civilizations had captured imaginations throughout the galaxy. Elder Chirith, now serving as the session moderator, rustled its branches for attention. "Before we proceed to formal business, the Council recognizes Prince George Windsor of Earth, who has requested to address the Assembly." George rose from his seat, noting the stark difference from 3 months ago. Then, the human delegation had been isolated, surrounded by empty seats as other species avoided association with the controversial newcomers. Today, those same seats were occupied by alien diplomats who nodded respectfully as he approached the central speaking platform. "Honored representatives," George began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. 3 months ago, I stood in a plaza surrounded by beings who questioned humanity's right to exist among you. Today, I stand before you humbled by the response that simple act of courage has inspired throughout our galaxy." The Krontor representative, Thane Rockmar, stamped his massive feet in approval. Since the Plaza incident, he had become one of humanity's strongest supporters, often remarking that the human prince had shown true Krontor spirit in his willingness to face overwhelming odds. "But I'm not here to speak about that day," George continued. "I'm here to share what we've learned since then, and to propose something that could benefit all of our civilizations." He activated a holographic display that filled the center of the amphitheater. The image showed a star map marking dozens of systems, with various colored indicators representing different projects and initiatives. In the past 3 months, human colonies have hosted over 200 cultural and scientific exchange programs with 47 different species. We've learned more about galactic civilization in this short time than in our previous 30 years of membership. The Zephyrian delegate, Prism Singer Veltar, flashed patterns of interest across her crystalline body. Human learning speed continues to surprise many species groups. Results show promise. "The results show more than promise," George replied warmly. "They show the potential for something unprecedented in galactic history." He gestured to the holographic display, which now showed detailed readouts of joint research projects, cultural festivals, and collaborative governance experiments taking place across human space. Every species here achieved greatness in isolation, developing your technologies, your philosophies, and your governmental systems over millennia of independent growth. Then you came together to form this council, bringing your completed civilizations into contact with others. The assembled delegates listened intently, many recognizing that George was building towards something significant. Humanity offers something different. We're still developing our civilization, still making mistakes, still learning fundamental lessons about governance and expansion. But we're doing it while integrated with the galactic community from the beginning. Elder Kirith's branches swayed thoughtfully. The human suggests that developing civilization within the community rather than isolation offers new possibilities. Exactly, George confirmed. What if, instead of requiring new species to achieve perfection before joining the galactic community, we embrace the opportunity to guide their development while learning from their fresh perspectives? A murmur of discussion rippled through the chamber as delegates began to grasp the implications of what he was suggesting. "I propose the establishment of the Emerging Civilizations Initiative," George announced. "A formal program that would provide structured guidance and support for species in their first century of interstellar development while ensuring their unique perspectives and innovations contribute to our collective knowledge." The hegemony representative, Fleet Commander Zakath, who had been one of humanity's harshest critics 3 months ago, spoke up. "Human Prince suggests significant change to established protocols. Risks involved require careful consideration." "You're absolutely right, Fleet Commander," George acknowledged. "But consider the opportunities we're currently missing. How many species have we turned away over the centuries because they weren't ready to meet our standards? How many innovations? How many fresh solutions to old problems? How many unique perspectives have we lost?" Captain Mitchell, watching from the diplomatic gallery, felt a surge of pride as she observed how George had transformed from the impulsive young royal who had charged into a hostile crowd into this thoughtful leader presenting complex policy proposals to the galaxy's most powerful beings. The holographic display shifted to show economic projections and technological advancement curves. The preliminary data from our experimental programs shows remarkable results. Species working together during their developmental phases achieve technological milestones 23% faster than those working in isolation. But more importantly, George continued, they develop governmental and social structures that are inherently more inclusive and adaptable. They learn to consider multiple perspectives from the beginning, rather than having to unlearn xenophobic tendencies later. A new voice entered the discussion. Prime Intellect Zendara of the Ancient Void Dancers spoke for the first time in the session. These beings were among the oldest in the galaxy, rarely participating in council debates unless matters of extreme importance were being discussed. Young Human speaks of concepts that echo ancient wisdom. The Void Dancers have observed that civilizations developed in isolation often struggle with integration, yet protocol exists for valid reasons. George bowed respectfully. Prime Intellect, would you share your ancient wisdom about how we might balance guidance with independence, support with self-reliance? The ethereal being shimmered with what might have been pleasure. Direct request for wisdom shows admirable humility. The Void Dancers propose modification to human concept. Emerging civilizations must demonstrate core competencies before full integration, but developmental support during learning phase shows promise. Elder Kirith rustled approval. Prime Intellect suggests staged integration with milestone requirements. Wisdom balances support with responsibility. The debate that followed lasted for hours, with representatives from dozens of species contributing ideas, concerns, and modifications to George's proposal. What emerged was a comprehensive framework that would revolutionize how new species were integrated into galactic civilization. As the session concluded, Thane Rockmar approached the human delegation. Prince George, Krontor wished to know, how does young human develop such wisdom? What experiences teach these insights? George smiled, thinking back to the moment 3 months ago when he had decided to walk into a hostile crowd rather than retreat to safety. Thane Rockmar, I learned from watching humans and aliens choose understanding over fear. I learned from seeing a little girl touch an alien being with curiosity instead of prejudice. I learned from discovering that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. And I learned, he continued, that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask the right questions and work together to find solutions. The Krontor's massive frame somehow conveyed approval. Human wisdom grows quickly. Krontor proud to call humans allies. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, Ambassador Chen joined George on the platform. Your Highness, I have to ask, did you plan any of this when you walked into that plaza 3 months ago? George laughed, looking around the chamber where species that had been hostile to humanity were now discussing collaborative projects and joint ventures. Ambassador, I just wanted to make sure our people got home safely that day. Everything else has been the result of beings choosing courage over fear, understanding over prejudice, and cooperation over isolation. Captain Mitchell approached from the gallery, shaking her head in amazement. Sir, intelligence reports indicate that 17 species have already volunteered to participate in pilot programs for the Emerging Civilizations Initiative, and there are 12 species currently in pre-contact phases who are being considered for accelerated integration programs. More than that, Ambassador Chen added, consulting her datapad. The Plaza incident has become required study material in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. They're calling it a masterclass in de-escalation and cross-species communication. George felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. The real masterclass came from everyone who chose to listen rather than react, who chose to engage rather than retreat, humans and aliens alike. As they walked through the corridors of the galactic capital, George reflected on how much had changed since that day at Nexus Prime. The little girl who had touched Elder Kirith's branches had become something of a galactic celebrity, her innocent curiosity inspiring children of dozens of species to ask questions about other civilizations rather than fear them. The philosophical discussions that had begun in the embassy had evolved into the Nexus Dialogues, regular broadcasts featuring representatives from different species exploring complex questions about governance, ethics, and civilization development. The programs were watched by billions of beings across the galaxy, fostering understanding between species that had barely communicated before. Captain Mitchell, George said as they reached the human embassy, do you still think walking into that crowd was the worst tactical decision you'd ever seen a royal family member make? The veteran security officer considered the question seriously. Sir, from a pure security standpoint, it was still incredibly dangerous and violated every protection protocol we have. She paused, watching alien children playing with human children in the embassy courtyard, their games requiring no translation devices, as laughter and joy spoke the same language across species barriers. But from a leadership standpoint, she continued, it may have been the most important decision any human has made since we achieved interstellar flight. George nodded, watching as a young Zephyrian taught a human boy how to communicate through color patterns, while a CrownGuard child showed several human and alien children how to properly stamp their feet in traditional greeting rhythms. Captain, do you know what I think the real lesson is from all of this? What's that, Your Highness? Courage isn't something you possess. It's something you choose moment by moment, when faced with fear and uncertainty. And when one being chooses courage, it gives others permission to be brave as well. 3 months ago, Prince George had walked into a hostile crowd to protect his people. Today, his courage had inspired millions of beings across hundreds of worlds to choose understanding over fear, cooperation over conflict, and hope over despair. The young prince, who had once stood alone against overwhelming odds, now stood at the center of a galactic community that was stronger, more inclusive, and more hopeful than it had been in centuries. And it had all begun with a simple decision to stand guard over those who needed protection, no matter the cost. In the years that followed, historians would mark the stand at Nexus Prime as the beginning of the Second Galactic Renaissance, a period of unprecedented cooperation and growth among the galaxy's civilizations. But for George, the true victory was much simpler. He had kept his promise to protect his people, and in doing so, had helped all beings find the courage to protect each other.